Your dental on the water.
You're Kingston?
No, that's
Not that far.
we are part of, we are much closer to home.
We were in Charleston about 2 or 3 years.
We all know they work.
Because, you know, we've got I think 400 pounds.
Make it a little darker, actually. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, that's probably good. Hello. How are we doing?
And you?
Great. Thank you all for joining me, and you've been doing this all day, so thank you for sticking it out and being here. Hopefully I'm interesting enough to keep your attention. So let's get right into it. So first off, my name is Daniel Neff. I'm the curator at the Fairbanks House. If you're not familiar, the Fairbanks House is in Dedham, Massachusetts. It was built in 1637, which makes it the oldest wooden structure standing in North America. It was built for Jonathan Grace Fairbanks from Yorkshire, England, and their 6 children. After that, 8 generations of the Fairbanks family lived there, the last one moving out in 1904. And that it became a museum in 1904 and is still owned and operated by the Fairbanks family today. Now, with 8 generations of one family, they had plenty of time to develop quirks, shall we say, and other things like that, and some very strongly held beliefs. So this is a picture of the hall, which is where I'm going to start telling you about some of the stuff in the house. So this is the floor plan of the house. The part outlined in green is the original portion of the house. This was built in 1637. 1650s or so, they add this back section here called what we call the lean-to. 1690s, they add a west wing, but then that's heavily, and it stays like that, just these 3 sections for about 100 years. And then around 1790, they heavily modify the west wing, making it this, and add the east wing. And then around 1800 or so, they add a little addition off the parlor, a second entryway, and a cheese closet that later gets turned into a privy. Really big advancement for 1800. So anyway, that's the general layout of the house, which is relevant because so most aperture paint markings or hex marks or counter magic type things we see tend to come from earlier generations, 1700s. The evidence in the Fairbanks house suggests that a lot of it is actually from the late 1700s, even the early 1800s. Possibly a large portion of it all from one or 2 generations, though not all of it, definitely. And so, so the majority of our aperture paint markings that we're going to talk about today are actually in this section of the house, on parts that probably weren't there until 1790 or so. So they must be after that. Not everything, though, is aperture paint or magic. One of the rooms, actually, so this room used to be 2 small rooms. There used to be a wall right here. And this side has math all over it. Somebody just kept doing equations all over the walls. And I have no idea why, but they did. And we also have names on the other side of that same room, so it used to be a different room. We have some names. This one is Harvey Drake, who I have not actually been able to figure out who he is. He's likely a servant or a friend of the family, something like that. But this one's a little easier, E. Fairbanks. So around when I think all these marks were made, Dad was named Ebenezer Fairbanks, and his oldest son was Ebenezer Fairbanks Jr. So it's probably one of these two guys making these marks. Now, why are we making so many marks in the late 1700s, early 1800s? Based on the number of marks I've found and where they are and what they apparently mean, this is an act of desperation. Something bad is happening to a family member and they're freaking out and they're dealing with it the only way they can think of. But we'll get to that more in a moment. First, I want to talk about some of the older marks. So this is the original front door frame. I don't know, how well can you guys see that? Yeah, I guess it's pretty good. The original front door frame, the door is no longer there. The door would have been right here, but it was moved like 3 feet to the left for reasons I still haven't figured out. But anyway, that was the original door. So this was the frame. Right here, you can actually see the very bottom of what used to be the door latch. So right next to the door latch, we have this X here. This is a St. Andrew's cross. So the majority of hex marks in the Fairbanks house are a St. Andrew's cross. In addition to all the other meanings, St. Andrew's cross was a protection against convulsions. So keep that in mind. We also have these circles. These were general protections against evil, could reference a number of things, including sort of a counter evil eye. There's a lot of possibilities. And then lastly, we have a demon trap. Demon trap was a series of lines, complicated series of lines, often crisscrossing. And one of the thoughts or one of the theories as to what a demon trap does, is that the thought was that a demon would see something like this and was supernaturally compelled to trace a complex pattern with their finger. And if you made it complex enough, by the time the demon has finished tracing it, the sun's come up and it has to go back from whence it came.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's a lot of, well, you're going to hear some things later that they had some really complex belief systems behind these things. Now, this is the hex mark in the house that we've known about for the longest time. When I started about 3 years ago, the prior curator said, here's the hex mark. And as for a long time, they thought there's just this one over the fireplace. This could be several different things, sort of a variation on a St. Andrew's cross or a Crusade cross, or possibly a variation on, oh yeah, so there's another cross in the same, so these are both in the hall. This is over the main fireplace, and this is just to the left of the fireplace. It's a little harder to see because of they painted over it. But you can see it's an X with sides, right? So some people call this like a butterfly mark, but that's not what they were going for back then. Yeah, it's an X, St. Andrew's cross or some other kind of cross. And then, and then there's some other ones. These are just below. So this one's about 3 feet off the ground. These are about a foot off the ground on the same wall. Can you guys see these? Yeah, okay, I wasn't sure how well it translated. So there's what looks like another one of those X's, an M, maybe an N. And so these are, here's another example of the same. Rather than mangle the Latin, I'll just translate it. These were for Virgin of Virgins, asking for the Virgin Mary's help. So anytime, generally marks like this would either be, M for Mary, or upside down V's for Virgin of Virgins. And they're often in sets like this. But you can see this is likely another M too. So anyway, and then we also have a pinwheel. I think those of you who were at Alyssa's talk earlier, she showed you this one too. But this is sort of a half-covered pinwheel design. That's also in the hall. And then we also have over here more M's or N's. And appears to be, it's very hard to see, but there's what's called a chiro over here, which is a P and an X sort of combined, and it's a reference to Jesus Christ. This, I don't know how well you can, this is a series of concentric circles that are immediately across from the fireplace. And I honestly don't know what these mean, but I assume it's based on all the other markings in that room, it must be another similar mark. Often circles are protective in a variety of different ways. So, but it's huge. Actually, this is one of the bigger ones. It's about 6 to 8 inches across, which is one of the larger ones in the house. So all that was in here, in this section. So one of the earlier parts of the house. And I think most of those marks come from either the 16 or 1700s. The rest of the ones we're going to see look like they're done differently. They're fairly faint. Hopefully we'll be able to see them on the projector. Suggesting they're faint enough that it suggests to me that rather than being done with the intent of them being permanent protections, they're actually being done as part of a ritual. But it's unclear exactly what oh yeah. So the ones that we're going to look at next are this section. The next slide is actually the door into this. So it's right here is a doorway into the east wing. And that's going to have this demon trap right next to the door. So again, demon would have to stop and play with that before he could do anything else. This is on the door going into the root cellar in the east wing. And this is a very rare mark in New England. It's much more common in England, but here in New England, you almost never see these combining circles. So this is two of our things together, our protective circle and sort of a cross shape at the same time. Another demon trap on the same door. So apparently somebody was worried about demons coming up from the basement. I'm not sure, but yeah, so this is scratches. And then another protective circle on the door frame of that same door. So a lot of marks on the root cellar door, not sure what's going on there. We have shoes. 4 shoes have been found in the walls and of the Fairbanks house. Predominantly, well, let me tell you about so this is, what do we have here? Oh yeah. So we have a woman's shoe, 2 women's shoes, both from the late 1700s, and then a pair of men's shoes, likely from the early 1700s. So we have multiple generations are putting shoes in their walls. Now, why? Well, a theory I've seen a few different places is that, so shoes are very personal items. You take them off, they're still shaped like your foot. But they're also full of essence. So, yeah, so essence, they believe, was part of your soul, or a little bit of what makes you, you. Now, we know today when we take off our shoes after the end of a long day, we get that funk, right? We understand that's not, well, it's kind of your essence, but it's foot sweat, right? Well, they thought it was just pure essence. And it just so happens that's what witches are trying to steal from you. Their whole MO is they're trying to take your essence. So you take an old, worn-out pair of shoes. These were all very worn out before they ever ended up in the chimney. And that's important, because the older the shoe, the more essence is in it, right? So you take an old essence-filled shoe, stuff it in the walls, preferably near the chimney, because the chimney is the witch's favorite way to get into your house. Because if you have your doors and windows all properly locked and properly hex marked, the easiest way for a witch to get into the house is to turn into a smoke or vapor, float down your chimney, out into the house, and then she can do whatever, including stealing your essence. So you have these shoes in the wall. The witch coming down the chimney senses the essence in the shoes and goes to check it out. The witch goes into the shoe, and part of all of this is the thought that witches couldn't move backwards, like a shark, apparently. So the witch goes into the shoe, can't back out, and you've trapped a witch in your old footwear. Made perfect sense in the 1700s. So this is the space, at least some of the shoes were found. There's actually a very large gap between the chimney, which is massive. There are 40,000 bricks in the chimney. and 3 fireplaces. It's the entire center of the house. So, which, no matter how much smoke or vapor the witch turned into, she could probably get down it. But anyway, there's the chimney, and then the wall's way over here. So there's this huge gap. And so we found at least 2 of the shoes were found during a repair job. The chimney was having some issues. Repairmen went up into this space and found the shoes. But we also have evidence that there may have been what's called a spiritual midden back here as well. But it's nothing that held together as well as shoes. So there's bits of debris up there that wouldn't have just gotten up there accidentally, but nothing concrete. So it could be a spiritual midden, it could just be trash, which the line between those is in some places literally non-existent. So anyway, back to the map. Now we're going to move over to the west wing because of you've seen a lot of hex marks. There are more in this wing than there are in the rest of the house combined. And one of them is a date, which helps us a little bit, right? 1781, okay. So that's a little bit before we otherwise think the house might have been built, so it's a little weird, but maybe, or that part of the house, I should say. So maybe that means it's a little earlier than we thought, but I only found this recently and haven't been able to do anything to confirm or deny. But anyway, 1781 gives us at least a framework of roughly when all this is happening. This is where it gets weird. So right as you go into the west wing, immediately in front of you is a brass nail or tack hammered into the middle of the floor. Now, it took me a long time to figure out any reference, like why would you do this? Turns out that there was a feeling that if somebody had any kind of disease that involved episodes of whatever, like intermittent fever, malaria, or, in I think this case, epilepsy. If you put a nail, so if somebody has an epileptic fit or a seizure, they fall to the ground, and then when they're done, you hammer a nail into the ground where their head landed when they had the seizure. That would cure them of the epilepsy. Theoretically, of course. Yeah, no, it didn't work that well, but they tried. And so what it looks like is there is somebody in this family, in the Fairbanks family, somewhere around 1800, that has something like a seizure disorder, epilepsy, convulsions of some kind, because all those St. Andrew's crosses I was talking about, one of the things St. Andrew's protects against is convulsions. So somebody in this family has some kind of movement disorder, tic, epilepsy, something, or possibly even multiple people. There's one person who lives in the house named Abigail Fairbanks. She's Ebenezer Sr.'s sister, but she makes it in her 80s with never moving out of the house, never getting married, never having any kids. And then the only reference to her death is that she died of a palsy, which we think of cerebral palsy, but that's, back then, any palsy was a catch-all term for a movement disorder. But then she has a nephew, one of Ebenezer Ebenezer Jr.'s brothers is named Abner Fairbanks. I can tell you the date Abner was born, the date he died, and that his name was Abner. It's literally all the information we have on him, and so that's a little interesting, a little weird. And that brings me to this. So this is a sort of a medical encyclopedia from 1749. This is their thoughts on it. So those who have in the second degree epilepsy is worse, are imagined by the vulgar to be possessed by the devil. It has been observed that epilepsy, especially the essential epilepsy, is very much governed by the moon. So like in one breath, he's saying like, clearly this is not the devil, it's the moon. So, oh well, so much for medicine. Even worse, in epilepsy and the palsy, after vomiting repeated and blisters, the following tincture may be given, but young persons may take mercury and broth with earthworms. That sounds bad. Wait till you see what adults get. Valerian root is a sleep aid, which can be really bad for you in large quantities. Pulverized castor It was thought to be a cure-all. Actually, it's a laxative, and they were using it raw, which means it also had ricin in it. Oak mistletoe, it's toxic. Cinnamon is just the same cinnamon you're using now. Rosemary, I have no idea what. So the problem with this book,
Is that false senna?
So the problem is, even though the whole book is in English, when he gets to a recipe for a drug, he puts it in Latin and then abbreviates everything, and there's no key for the abbreviations. So you have to have like a really good grasp of Latin before you can even read these. So I managed to piece together all the other stuff, but I'm not sure what full sen is. Full sen, I'll look that up. Jalap was a purgative, and so is turbeth. So purgative means. So yeah, imagine what happens when you eat this. So anyway, that's the medical way to deal with epilepsy. So, but before we even thought of epilepsy as a medical condition, imagine it's the 1700s. You don't really understand medicine. Clearly, even the doctors don't get it that well yet. You have a family member that has seizures, fits. What does that look like?
Possession.
Yes, possession, right? So that's probably why a lot of these marks are here. If we look, this is a little faint, but if we look up here, so there's a lot of tally marks on the wall right over that nail. And I'm not sure what they're for, I haven't figured that out yet. But there's also this, it looks like it might be a 6 and a 9, but also the way they curve suggests to me that might also be the cancer symbol. And the sign cancer was also a protective, help people with medical issues, supposedly. It was protection against disease. So that's possibly what that is. Another view of the cancer sign and the tally marks. I have no idea. I'd love to find out what they were tallying. This one's a little harder to see, but this was over the door, and I don't know what this is. But if anybody can tell me what this shape is, I'd love to know. But it's over the door into the west wing.
Is it the white one that it looks kind of like a D in cursive?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Kind of like a D, but I don't know as far as aperture markings or even like anything like that. I'm not sure. But yeah, it could be a D. Now this is a door into, so not the room with the math, but the other one. And just some random writing on the walls. Now this is next to the door frame into that room. This is like a pinwheel or a very, very primitive hex foil. But what's really interesting about this mark on the door frame is that it is immediately under a latch on the outside of the door. So this was a bedroom, the latch on the outside of the door. Yeah, not good. Inside, and the other room has this demon trap on the door frame where the other one has a lock and a hex foil. I can't make out what this word is, but it's written on that same door. Then we go into the room that has the lock on the outside. We have things like very clear X here, and then over here, this is more of our VV or M for Virgin Mary. 3 X's at a time. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 3 crosses on the mount when Jesus was crucified, 3 crosses. This is a variation on the VV, one inside the other, that it looked like they were originally planning on making part of a more elaborate thing, but then they stopped. Not sure why. But yeah, definitely a V and a V. This is so that's next to a window in that room. And then under that window are all these marks. And detail over here, backwards S and an R. And it looks like the S might be on top of something else, so it might be a variation on a Chiro. And then the R is another sort of Virgin Mary protective mark. And then you see more X's and just various scratches and stuff. Next to the same window, on the other side of the same window from the VV, here's another very long, wavy demon trap and some other marks. So this is all in one room. The window's completely covered, the walls are covered. This is the one with the lock on the outside. The other room has, the one with the math also has some other marks. VV, name again. Not sure. Yeah. More VVs, more pinwheels, including one in kind of in a circle. More writing. Excuse me. So this is where it gets even weirder, because we're not weird enough yet. This is the door that goes to the upstairs section of the West Wing. So the three sections of the house, the main house, the East Wing, and the West Wing, each have their own upstairs with their own staircase, and they're not connected. So the West Wing upstairs is just a single bedroom, and that's it. There's nothing else at the top of those stairs. And there's a door 2 steps up that staircase, which is a little awkward. And this is written on the door, whatever this, it's faded now. I'm having trouble deciphering what it says. But that's on the door. You can see, it looks like there's some stuff was chalked on, and now it's hard to tell what it was. But next to that door is another X, and on the door, more locks on the outside. And this one is interesting because it looks like the lock had to be replaced a few times. Making that even worse, if we go inside the door, there's scratches all over the wall next to the door. And then this right here is a groove, almost exactly the width of a human finger. So it actually looks like somebody was just sitting at the locked door, just doing this over and over again until they wore a 1/4-inch deep groove into the wood. Yeah. So I'm still trying to figure out exactly what happened here, but I don't think it was good. So that's, because the talk wasn't creepy enough, some creepy dolls. You think they're creepy? The mustache is real human hair. Those are in collections, thankfully. If you go to visit the Fairbanks House, you won't have to see these in person, but I do. So, yeah, any questions? Anything?
Well, you talked about the one boy that
Yeah,
possibly epileptic or possibly Tourette's or something.
Yeah, it could be. Yeah, that's another option.
I'm locking him up because it seems
Yeah.
that someone's being locked up in this room because they have these seizures.
Mm-hmm.
Epileptic, you're kind of, you're having a seizure, you may look possessed, but you're on the ground and you're pretty helpless.
Mm-hmm.
But Tourette's or something like that, they may act out.
No, I had thought of that too, that there might be something that seemed a little more violent to an undereducated eye. But also, again, we have 2 doors with locks on them, so there might have been, it might be his aunt and him at the same time, or... one thing to note here is that Abner has an older brother named Jason Fairbanks, who murdered his girlfriend and was hanged for it. And so, yeah. So he had a lot of issues when he was very young. They tried to give him a smallpox inoculation. They did it wrong and gave him smallpox. They then treated the ensuing sores with mercury. So Jason had issues, and to put it really mildly, Jason had he had a shriveled right arm, but he also had trouble focusing on things, and he was physically weak, so he was sort of idle. He just wandered around town. So we know a lot about Jason, and he was allowed to wander around. But then there's a room with a lock on the door. So whoever was in that room, they had to have perceived as being worse off than Jason.
And how old was Abner when he passed? Or
22, 23, somewhere in there. He was 2 years older than, 2 years older than Jason, who was hanged when he was 21, and he died 1 month after Jason.
And what year was that?
1801. Yeah. So that's again why, based on that stuff and the date, we're thinking late 17, early 1800s is when a lot of this stuff came up.
Do you know where he was buried?
With the rest of his family and about 20 feet away from the girl he murdered in the Dedham graveyard. Yeah. Yeah.
Were the Fairbanks Catholic?
Oh, no, I should have mentioned that. They were Puritan.
Even with all the Virgin Mary?
Yeah, that's actually that's part of what originally got me on the desperation angle, is how many Virgin Mary calls there are. You do see those in Puritan stuff, just sort of among all the other hex marks. The sheer number looking for the Virgin Mary's help does suggest a level of like, we'll try anything. Yeah, so the Fairbanks are interested. So the original founders of the family are really Puritan. They're Puritan leaning, but the founder of the family, Jonathan Fairbanks, refuses to officially join the church until his daughter marries into one of the more religious families, and then he's like, okay, fine. But he had a useful skill. He was a wood turner, and nobody else in Dedham could do that, so they overlooked the whole not Puritan thing. But they sort of, by this point, by 1801 or so, they're in the Congregational Church. So you guys know the sort of history of Puritanism. About that time, you have the schism. So you have the more liberal branch goes off and becomes Unitarianism, and people who don't want to be that liberal go Congregationalist. This is a super simplified version of it, but roughly. But yeah, Ebenezer's Jr. and the family at that time go Congregationalist. So yeah, they're Puritan, Congregationalist, but they're using all these things even in the 1800s. Yeah.
How many people were living in the house?
I think over the course, so the family lived in the house for 267 years. So over that time, it was like 65 people total. But actually, in Ebenezer Jr.'s time, they actually hit the most at one time. Not including the servants they would have had in there, there were 15 people living in the one house. Wow. And that included Jason, Abner, Abigail, both Ebenezer's, and all the kids and stuff, so.
Do you know, like, which ones are crazy?
I need to be careful answering that question because the museum is still run by the Fairbanks family. Some of the people on the board are direct descendants of the people I'm talking about right now. There were, so yeah, we have a feeling that there were a few members of the family that had medical conditions that were not properly understood around 1800.
Nicely put.
Yeah.
So on the shoes that are stored in the walls, as a historian, how do you, well, one, how do you find one that the shoes stored in the walls mean X? To me, it's not something that says, hey, let me write this down, that I'm practicing sort of
So, yeah, there's
voodoo.
that's the problem is because it was sort of frowned upon, particularly by the Puritans, a lot of this stuff doesn't get written down. So you have to kind of piece it together based on, you get enough evidence together and okay, that's that. So the shoes in the wall is fairly common in New England, but it's really common over in England. There's a lot of places with shoes in the wall. And so there's been a lot of research and people have figured out that it was, so later generations, like 1800s, people are doing this because it's lucky. But you find if you go back far enough, most things that we think of as good luck charms were originally protections against evil. Four-leaf clovers, rabbit's feet, horseshoes, all of that started out as wards against evil. And as we stopped believing in wards against evil, we turned them into like good luck charms. Because you gotta believe in something. Is there somebody over here? No? Okay.
How many witches could fit in one shoe?
That's a good question. My guess would be it would be one witch per shoe, which is why you want to keep adding them, but I don't know for sure. Good question. Back there.
Do you know if the Fairbanks tried to keep the bloodline Fairbanksy?
They didn't. Yeah. So yeah, inbreeding, is that an issue? Not that I have been able to tell. There are a few places in the family genealogy where it's like, and then this person married so-and-so. See here in this book. They married their cousin or something like that. But there wasn't anything, first cousins and farther isn't likely to cause genetic issues. And we don't have evidence of any like sibling marriages or anything like that. What we do know is that So I don't know if any of this stuff's genetic. What it might be is things, excuse me, mercury or lead poisoning could be a factor. A lot of things could be a factor, is really. But, early 1800s, late 17, early 1800s is a dangerous time to live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My boyfriend and I were lucky to go on a tour with you once, maybe a month or two ago, and may I just say, if folks haven't been on the tour over there, it's an amazing house and
Thank you.
such a beautiful job.
Here.
I wanted to ask, have you tried searching, and I don't know if these papers even exist, but looking for maybe who was the doctor or doctors in the town at the time? Anything in church records? Have you gone through diaries to see if anybody says anything about problems with the Fairbanks?
That's a really good question. So unfortunately, no, as far as I know, nobody in that branch of the Fairbanks family was into keeping a journal, which is unfortunate. If they were, though, it's...
Their neighbors.
Well, yeah, okay, so there's one guy who's sort of the doctor in town named Nathaniel Ames. And he wrote about everything that happened. Even if he wasn't involved, he got his word in. He wrote like half a book about Jason Fairbanks. And he was the prosecution's expert witness. So the Fairbanks were not fond of him. Actually, they didn't really like him much before that, and then that was the end of that. So the Fairbanks family ended up with actually two different local doctors that didn't talk to Nathaniel Ames too much and kept closer record, better kept their records. And I think that's probably, my guess is that's intentional. The Fairbanks are specifically going to doctors that won't prattle on.
I was just curious if you found like any receipts or anything for those doctors.
We know when Ebenezer Jr. dies, he has quite a lot of debt, in part because when Jason, even after Jason's hanged, Ebenezer Jr. spends the rest of the family fortune trying to prove Jason's innocence, self-publishing books about how innocent Jason is and stuff like that. So he has a few $1,000s of debt when he passes away. And one of the bigger bills is to a doctor, who I'm still researching. I haven't been able to find much about that doctor, but he's sort of suspect one for being the guy who might know what was actually happening.
You said the historian before you only knew of that one mark.
Yeah.
So what were you doing differently that you were able to find all of these things, or did you know anything specific?
Being a huge nerd. No, I've always had an interest in the history of occult and that sort of thing. And I actually used to give ghost tours in Boston. Actually now give a ghost tour at the Fairbanks House. Subtle plug. Yeah, so I've always had an interest in these sorts of things, and so had a general idea of them already. And then, so the one over the fireplace is by far the most obvious, so that one was pretty well known about, and so looking at that, I started to just sort of look around and see is there other things here, and sure enough, are there other things here? And sure enough, there were. And the more I look, the more I find. One of the circle on the basement door, I found last week. So they're still popping up. I'm still finding them. Particularly the later added ones, the circa 1800 ones, are fairly faint, which again is part of, I theorize they might be part of a ritual more than meant to be a permanent mark. Yeah.
Are there any current signs of abnormal activity, like spirits?
Oh, paranormal, you mean? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Actually, 2 weeks ago, I was giving, so we'll get into ghost stories now. 2 weeks ago, I was giving a tour, and I was in the lean-to, the back portion of the house, and I heard coming from the east wing. I went over there, and there's a pebble in the middle of the floor, like a little rock. And there's where a rock would have come from in the east wing. I still have it on my desk. I've heard in the wing where Jason, in addition to all the issues with smallpox and mercury poisoning, probably had consumption, tuberculosis as well, because he had all of the luck. Oh, so I should also know Jason may have probably murdered Elizabeth Fales, but he probably also didn't know he murdered Elizabeth Fales because he was that. Anyway, so in that same wing, I heard coughing from an area where there wasn't any people. So yeah, there's still active stuff. Yeah. I think that's another question somewhere. No? No more questions? Do you just want to hear more ghost stories? Yeah. One more. So actually, I'll tell you why I started the ghost. So again, I had prior job gave ghost tours in Boston. Actually, some good stuff right around here. Because it followed the Freedom Trail, which is right out the front door of this place. But anyway, that's so. When I started the job, or was applying for the job and talking to my predecessor and the other people there, I asked, "This place is 400 years old. It was lived in for 8 generations. Any ghosts?" No, nothing. There's no ghosts in here. As soon as I move into the curator's house, which is on the property, and start working, everybody's like, "Let me tell you about the ghosts." So yeah. Anyway. One of the things I was warned about, and sure enough happened, roughly every week or two. So again, I live in another building on the site, and there are motion alarms in the old house, but if they go off, the alarm goes off in my apartment. And so the prior curator warned me, like, yeah, the ghost will set off the motion alarm. About a week in, my wife and I are talking about all this weird stuff everybody's telling me, and the alarm goes off. And it does that roughly every week or two, always between 1 and 3 a.m., the alarm goes off, and it keeps doing that right until I start giving ghost tours, and it hasn't happened again since. The way I figure it is, if anything, again, 8 generations, 267 years, all before hospitals were a thing. Everybody who lived there probably died there. If there's any place in the country that's haunted, it's going to be the Fairbanks House. Yeah.
Would you have taken the job if they had told you about it?
I would have been even quicker to say yes. But they didn't want to take any chances. So unless any other questions? Oh, yeah.
Can you get down into the basement and we can go down into the basement?
Yeah, I have. So the west and east wings both have full root cellars under them. The original house has a crawl space that is currently inaccessible, but I'm planning on getting one of those snake cameras to get in there and see what's over there. But yeah, the root cellars are super creepy. Like including the one that has, all the marks on the door to the root cellars. Like, yeah, there's something bad happened down there. Or not, or maybe somebody was paranoid, you never know. But yeah, there are root cellars, there's the basement. Yeah, I'm obviously a little biased, but I think it's an amazing house, and you should visit. Any other questions? The ghost tour, okay, fine. If you want me to plug it more, ghost tours start third week of August. It'll be Fridays and Saturdays, and they start at 7 and go to 8. So it's like as the sun's setting, we give the tour. Regular tours are during the day. Thank you. Creepy ghost children off there with dolls.
Yeah.